old presentation? I don't think it is. But hey, welcome to the virtual brown bag. So while we're waiting for Claudio to join, I'll get it started. So, yeah, here's what it is. It's our weekly meeting, open to all devs. Feel free to join, talk about tips, tricks, experiences, frustrations, difficulties. Share whatever is interesting to you. Get a conversation started. Claudio and I typically roll up with some bullet points, but we would prefer to hand it over to others to do most of the chatting. Um, it happens every. Yep, that's not. This is the old presentation. Claudio, yeah, this is not the right one. But anyway, it's on Skype, not on live meeting, because this is an old presentation, probably from 12 years ago. Then,
That's right.
um, yeah, when virtual altnet existed and we used their meeting, that's fun. Um, so it's not there, but we talked about all sorts of stuff. A lot more since then, since this presentation is 12 years old. Not 12 years old, because 20 VS 2010 is on here, so a
Right.
little more recent than that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's only one
uh,
deck.
yeah, only one decade. But yeah, we're happy to talk about anything, and we will talk about it. Uh, sure. Um, so yeah, so we basically start talking. That's not going to be relevant. Hey, how about this? I'm just gonna say this. Um, the remember that the meeting is recorded. We do put it on YouTube, so don't share anything that will get you or your employer in trouble and make us have to edit the video. It's a pain in the ass. And yeah, that being said, I'm gonna stop sharing and I'll go back to you. And Claudia, you had stuff you wanted to talk about, right?
Uh, Actually, yeah, I've been in meetings since 10, so I'm like reframing my mind to remember, okay, what are we doing? Oh, yes, from back. All right, what can we share today? Trying to remember what I've been up to lately. One thing that I've been up to lately is using Cypress IO for some of the
Mhm.
end-to-end tests in the project. And as I shared a couple weeks ago, I guess, making sure that I can write my tests, always following given when then, because if I look at my Cypress IO tests, they look pretty much the same as my C Sharp tests, my, Angular tests. They all look from the outside pretty similar until
Mhm.
we jump into the actual implementation. And then something that I'm trying to learn that I still don't have figured out in Cypress IO is just how to pull things out of the DOM, because they do recommend you use, say, a data dash CY attribute, right, that you can use for testing to say, hey, I want to pull the customer detail out of this page. I want to pull the sales order out of this uh, thing. And that works until it doesn't. There are situations where you can use the Cypress IO screen to use there's like a little element picker or something that you point at an element, and it will tell you if it finds data CY, it will create the path for you. If it finds an ID, it will use that. If it finds CSS classes, it will use that. When it cannot find anything, then it's going to give you like this full path to the elements. Where you are using like Angular material, for example, the full path may be very complex, right? Because it adds a bunch of layers in between your container and what you're trying to get out of it. So that's one bit that I'm trying to still figure out, okay, what am I doing wrong here that I cannot just pull the thing by the actual ID that I'm giving it? And I also another thing that I remember from writing this kind of test from my like cucumber days was that I could just say, hey, from the user's perspective, all I want to verify is that the following data shows up on the screen, like the invoice
Mhm.
number shows up on the screen. Where or what part of the DOM is actually showing, or whether I have it in a label or an input field, I don't care. I just want to make sure that I see that text in there. I haven't seen a way to do that yet. I'm seeing myself like having to read through individual controls and pulling the values out of the control to do the comparison. And
So
I cannot like find a way to do that.
you have access to the DOM pretty much, right? It's in browser.
Yeah.
So just
Yes.
grab an element that's a root element of the thing that you need and call its text content property. That will return all text. That's, all. It's not the inner HTML. It will return all English, language, all text inside of it, and you can just do what contains in there. Now that's not going to show you if it like it's hidden with CSS or something like that. But the
Right.
only way to go do that would be through OCI. Um,
Okay.
but the text content property should probably cover 99% of your use cases.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Looking for that.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a property on any DOM element. So
Right. Okay.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I do like. I've been experimenting with the because I want to be able to run the end-to-end tests in two ways. I want to be able to run against no backend whatsoever because I just want to like fake the data and make sure that I'm verifying the workflow from the user standpoint. But there are certain tests that I would like to tag with, yeah, I maybe want to add that against the production version, right? If I'm not like changing data or anything, just the navigation again. So being experimenting with that. So there is a request function in Cypress that we can say, hey, whenever you see the following request coming through as
Mm-hmm.
a network request, this is what I want you to use.
Yeah.
And use it, you can just pass in like an object into it, or you can pass like a JSON, or you can point out to an external JSON file. So I've been experimenting with, I want to be able to create like folders that have certain data that represents a given scenario, right? Like an employee existing in the system, an employee that has been fired, or something that adds meaning to that test data, so I can then reuse in
Mm-hmm.
different test cases. So that's something I've been experimenting with lately.
Yeah. Good stuff. Um. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Cypress is interesting to me. Like I don't know. I still never actually used it. I remember JB was all about it. When he was using it though.
Was using
Uh,
it? I didn't,
what was that?
he was using it. I didn't know that. I mean, I've heard of
Yeah.
Cypress maybe 3 years ago, two maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how long it's been around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's how long.
Okay.
Um. Yeah. Yeah. And he was using Cypress. I mean, he was talking about it when we kind of did V2 of this meeting, so like probably 2015, 2014. He was really, really digging on it. And, JB doesn't really talk up a lot of stuff. So it's like, all right, well, I don't have, I still haven't had an opportunity to use it, but I've, recommended it to people based on his and a couple other people's recommendations. But um, yeah. Yeah.
What else?
Let's see what else. Do y'all have anything you want to talk about? All right. If not, I can start going through my list.
Actually, there's one thing I like to throw out there just to get you guys' opinion on. Um, as software developers or people involved with, building products through software, do you guys feel yourself trusted? Do you feel like the business trusts you and vice versa?
In what way?
Hmm. So I've been seeing like from people talking, from researches that I've been doing, where businesses see IT and like developer teams as like contractors. They don't see like the development team, for example, as part of the business, as part of the, okay, these guys are, they play a role in the strategic things that we're trying to accomplish with this business. It
Mhm.
seems more like, okay, we business, we know our stuff, and then we outsource some of the work to these IT folks. We tell them what they have to do, what we want from them. We get their results because we don't necessarily trust them because I mean, they never deliver on time and they never deliver what I'm actually asking them to. So there's like a trust thing that I felt that, and I've heard from people describing problems like that. I'm wondering, do you guys go through stuff like that? Or if you do feel it, why? What makes you feel like business trusts you, and you trust the business, and so on?
I'll say the struggle is real.
Struggle is
Anytime you
real.
come into a new role or something like that, if you kind of come on as a contractor, um, you're definitely behind the power curve as far as what they want you to do. Um, there's a lot of stuff that's happened before you got there, and there's a lot of assumption that there's of just like tribal knowledge that you have no clue about, and you know, so you'll get assigned a work item, you'll start working on it, then realize you're missing some info, and that's how you just end up with these work items that just seem to get bigger and bigger because all the information that's needed to do that work item is not in the ticket.
Gotcha. Huh.
Yeah.
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 Makes sense.
It's interesting because like as the people that write the software that people then put on their computer and run, and that yeah, oftentimes doesn't get much of an audit, security audit. You actually get so much uh, responsibility and trust. Um, I don't know. I feel like in the situations I've been in, I've seen like when over the time that I was at Surge, it was almost surprising how much our clients you know, opened everything up to us. So I almost had the opposite experience. So I was like, why are you giving me access to all this? I mean, I understand that you don't have like that it's all just in your wiki and some of these pages are relevant to me and some are not, but you've got like access keys and shit in here and I shouldn't have access to it. What are you doing? Um, so yeah, I almost feel like my experience has been the opposite.
Uh,
Um, but I mean, like as a contractor, consultant, freelancer, building up trust is the central part of it, right? You don't come in having trust. Why would you? You have to build up trust. To a large degree, that happens when you're a new employee as well, right? You have to build up trust. I don't know. I don't know that I've yeah. I don't know that I've seen the other side of it too much. I'm sure it happens.
okay.
Yeah.
How do you, and it's a question to everybody, how do you build trust? So when you get into like a new client or a new relationship there, how do you build trust? What are the treats, um, that you go after?
Mm, wait, say that again?
So how do like if they mentioning about building trust when you're like a new contractor or a new employee at a place, how do you build trust? What are the techniques you personally use that work out well for that?
So, yeah. Um, my kind of go-to technique in general is listening and earnestly trying to understand the product and the thing they're trying to achieve. and trying to understand it on a deep level. And every single time, like I've gotten positive responses from that pretty much every single time. And you can leverage that trust into also, because people are like, oh, okay, they're not only understanding stuff from the point of view of things that I care about, but also like they're asking smart questions that, like you only have to ask. like it, I remember on a project we were for a government agency not too long ago. Like I was on a call and like just listening through and trying to think through it and be like, well, okay, but does XYZ actually work like that? Because it always seemed to me like it actually worked in the opposite order. And it'd be like, oh no, that's a really good point. You're right. We shouldn't implement it that way, and that like saves some time just because you asked the right question at the right time. And I think people react really well to that. Another thing, like technique that technique, I just do it, but it is something that has worked well in the past. Um, so another project I was on, like it was with like the VP of the company had started the Skunkworks prototype inside of there, and they wanted to like make it more of a product. And like the guy was an engineer, developer, but he'd been a little bit out of the game. So just being willing to like talk code and like show him better ways of doing things by using underscore and be like, hey, these 10 lines of code you could do in this one line of code here, and which comes down to like professionalism, knowing the framework backwards and forwards, and really thinking hard about how to broach any given topic in a way that's not insulting or anything. I think also that worked really well. Like within a couple weeks, he was just like giving me the access to everything and turning over the keys and being great. I can go do all this stuff. Um, yeah, those are the two techniques, and then for a lot of people, like just delivering. Like if you're a contractor, delivering on what you're actually promising, speaking up at the right times, those help. Those can also hurt, but sometimes sometimes you have to take a risk to build trust, right? Yeah.
Okay.
You're in a situation where you're like, if I speak up about this, I might piss someone off, but if I don't, then it's very possible I end up looking bad to their managers, and you kind of have to take the risk. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys, for entertaining my ask.
Yeah. And yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts?
I'd say one way you can build trust is getting in there and getting things done. Um,
Yeah.
Right.
they kind of skips over your point though about figuring out what it is they're actually trying to do. Uh,
Right.
how do you actually deliver value without knowing everything you need to know when you start?
Right.
That's the trick.
Yeah, because I can totally relate to that because yeah, we may come in and the business says, well, I want you to do this. You give them what they want, but not necessarily what they need, right? To know what they need, then we need to be asking questions. How is this bringing value to your business? Have you thought about these other things? Because sometimes they're not really 100% sure on what they actually need. They just say that they want X, but what they need is Y. So I do think there's got to be a balance. Like, yes, we have to deliver result, but we need to understand what's bringing the most value, and we cannot get to it until we've clarified those things with the business.
Another thing I think it makes it awkward when you're starting uh, new role, a job, is trying to figure out if you're meeting the expectations, right? What is your employer looking for at you for? You know, do they want somebody who's going to come in and kind of push back on the requirements and things like that that are generated, or are they just looking for somebody who's going to come in and just get the job done, kind of thing? Because I'm not sure that every company wants somebody to come in is going to come in and ask questions and push back on everything. Uh, but I guess it uh, depends on your situation.
Right. Well, and I think that also when we ask questions, we have to do so in a way that we're not necessarily pushing back, right? Sometimes, yeah, we ask questions, but we do so in a way that it seems like we are pushing back on things. But like many times when I'm asking questions, more like I just don't understand. I would like to have the same meaning associated with the concepts that you're telling me that you do to make sure that we're all on the same page and I'm doing my best to deliver what you have or what you want. So yeah, that makes sense. I dig it.
Um, yeah,
Cool.
I guess we can talk about some other stuff.
Sure,
Um,
man.
yeah. So okay, I'll go on kind of my rant of the day. Um,
Okay.
and actually, so I'll preface with this: um, people are too hard on people who do open source. It is really difficult. It is really thankless. A lot of times, people kind of fall into it and then get all these expectations hoisted on them with a lot of support. That said, I feel like so the largest ORM in the node space, I feel is completely dropped the ball and is it's sequelized and it's I've just been looking through and trying to get some very straightforward answers on it, and like it seems like there's no one on the project who's like answering any questions. Just trying to look through their commits. It looks like there's just one person that's working on it sporadically, and they don't really answer questions. If you look through their issues, it's just pages and pages of issues where either no one comments or it's just the original poster commenting over and over again. And they take you like through all these templates or like to write up the issue and stuff like that, and then no one is on there monitoring, which I can only and like 97 open pull requests, no statuses, like that. I would say is an error of leadership, of open source leadership. Like I am very sensitive to like people need help and people need stuff like that, and people need to do that. But you also, as an open source maintainer, need to understand that when you claim the mantle of open source maintainer, you're supposed to be doing things, not doing stuff that actually harms the project. One of the things you could do that to actively harm the project is harm the community. One of the things that can harm the community the most, or force people to drop out, is asking them to put an effort and into contributing something, which an issue is absolutely a contribution, and then not getting any response at all. Like that's going to cause people to stop doing that. And so, like when this like the, in something like Sequelize is certainly large enough to have tried to join some open source foundations to try to prevent this stuff. Um, so I don't know. I'm kind of ranting about it, and like the interesting thing is like who like this stuff like this hurts most is actually junior developers, and specifically people who would be willing to hire junior developers, because if I have a bunch of senior developers, I shrug my shoulders. I go fix their problems, or go use or go don't use an ORM or switch to a different ORM or something. I don't care. But if you've got junior developers, in order for them to make progress to move forward, they have to stick with what they're familiar, and that's what's typically taught. That's what it sequelizes what's in all the freaking tutorials out there. And that's what they have. That's what they have some experience of. That's what they're using to transition into those big concepts. And then you run into situations where you have to question whether, your choice to use it on a project is a legitimate choice. And then you start saying, well, maybe I can't use junior developers after all, like I thought I could, right? Um, it generates like a problem that really, that ripples outward from there, that I think people, need to appreciate, especially when they're taking up the mantle of a maintainer. Yeah.
Well,
Is,
It's
that's
is it possible that this open source project is kind of uh, in the process of being abandoned, or
I mean, that is essentially what's happening, but like it's the largest. I would say it's in the top 10 easily most like known projects in the node space. At that point, like that's kind of not acceptable. And at that point, once the maintainers started seeing that this was on the something that could happen on the horizon, there were steps that should have been taken, right? And again, super sensitive to like stuff, but like at some point you also do have to have responsibility for, you know, for keeping the community healthy and kind of the ripple effects throughout it. Um, what are the steps you try to take at that point? Have you been trying to find help? Have you been trying to find membership in a foundation, right? We're not talking about a project with like 10 stars and a couple hundred downloads a week. Like, right. Um, so I mean, like part of that is the whole, yeah, everyone underappreciates open source and every company should be contributing to it a lot more. But you also get the feeling of like broken contracts as well. Like just broken contracts with the community. Uh, it's rough and it's very frustrating to see because again, like the people it ends up hurting is the ones who are kind of the most in need of help. Um,
I don't know, everybody should have that experience when you get an error or whatever you're using a piece of software, and then you have to, you know, put the error message in Google and you get no results back, and there's no help for any of it. It's always a fun experience.
well, right, like the thing that I'm running into now, like I ran into is like I'm trying to figure out, so using the ORM, how to like when they have this function called sync, which is supposed to kind of recreate the database. I think it's supposed to synchronize the database, which when you run it on an empty database, it recreates it, um, with the proper parameters. But their documentation just says it syncs it, and there's no definition on what syncing means or what triggers a sync, what triggers a recreate. So like I kind of submitted that. I'm like, describe my issue. I was like, look, I'm running this in unit tests, where I'm trying to recreate my database on every single test, so that I don't get data from old tests in there. And like I filled out the whole thing, I did that and submitted to them, and then nothing. And again, it's one thing like to say like, hey, we're busy, this is an issue. I agree. Or they'll be like, hey, here's where you look, and we would appreciate a PR. Totally get that. Um, Not having any response at all is actually harmful, because you put out all this effort. You feel like you're shouting into a hole. They direct you, like, if you have questions, go to Stack Overflow. Well, no one's freaking answering stuff on Stack Overflow, because none of those people are on Stack Overflow answering questions about it. um and yeah, like it leads to people wanting to leave the community, not being involved with it anymore. And again, it kind of creates this very long tail of people that hurts, and so it does feel like there's at the very least not good like management, not good leadership, and where where duties are being allocated properly, right? And I think that might be like a general problem, I guess, in open source where leadership is lacking because that's a lot of times not why people are getting into it. Yeah. So people who have no particular skills or any interest in working on a leader level are just there. And then that kind of so and then I kind of take that and compare and contrast that with something like org mode. The other thought bubble that this leads to is like, is there a part of it that GitHub could help? Because I mean, GitHub could certainly detect when a project with a lot of stars has a ton of PRs and a bunch of issues that are not getting any real traction, and like raise some sort of alarms. And second of all, is GitHub actually harming it? Because there's another community that I'm part of just through their mailing list is the org mode community, where and they don't use GitHub, right? They're all GNU and everything. They don't use an issue tracker at all. It's all done via email. I think they have a series of tags where if you pull down the email in Emacs, it sorts it a particular way, and I never managed to figure it out. But like but that I don't see that happen very much there, even though like the main core project developer pops in maybe once every 2 weeks to review a couple things. But you kind of don't have this situation of 90% of things staling. And it might just be like a notification issue that if you join the mailing list, you're automatically by default getting blasted with everything, and therefore people are pitching in. And whereas in GitHub, that's not what happens when you create an issue. I don't really know, but or it could actually be the medium that GitHub kind of gives this facade of a professional thing, which it totally is not, and not trying to be. Yeah. So there's kind of the thought bubbles there around that. It's hard. I don't want to see like open source stuff die, but if it's not doing its job.
Well, and the thing is it their job, right? Because a lot of open sourcing is mostly like volunteering, type of work. It's not necessarily a job. So maybe the people who were committed to it at some points, they ended up like taking a job at a different place. So now they're not using that thing on a daily basis. So who picked it up?
Well, right. Well, that's the thing. And for a lot of projects, I would be saying like, yeah, that's right. But for a large keystone project, well, what steps did you take to make sure that there was a transition of power, right? Like that's a very reasonable question to ask, because when you were in it and when you were committed to, you were in a leadership position then. You might have not liked to think about it that way, but you were. All right, how did you transition that leadership? And it seems like nobody did. And I mean, it's very possible I'm missing part of the story, but that's kind of what it looks like. And
it could be possible too that something happened in the original contributor's life that caused him to have to spend more time at work, or he had kids or something like that.
oh, sure, but it's not one person. Like again, this is an ORM. There's hardly any ORMs that are written by one person.
Right. Okay.
There's like 4 or 5 people. And there's hundreds overall contributors. 4, 5, 6 core contributors over various periods of time. Right. We're not talking one person. Yeah. Like, again, like you're large enough to be part of an open source foundation. It's like there's I mean, I guess I could be mistaken about what open source foundations do, but I think the one thing that they do is make sure that there are plans for oversight and for transition, things like that. Yeah.
Maybe this one's just not with one of the lesser open source foundations.
Yeah, I don't know. It's it's been very frustrating kind of a couple of days, like trying to I guess I'll just ignore this hopefully, and like try to write all my tests in a way that don't have to deal with the fact that every single test still sees stale data. Like there's certain kind of assertions I just can't make. But yeah, and again, it's such a simple thing. It's just someone needs to pipe up and be like, well, this is what sync actually means, and like this is what this concept. You like it's a concept that's defined in terms of itself in the documentation, right? It's like, all right, documentation error, that's fine, but that information is of someone's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or at least someone can point you somewhere to look at it. Like, no.
Just out of curiosity, maybe you're trying to use it in a way that the original dev team never thought of using it.
I think I suppose that's possible, but also, what the hell else do you use an in-memory SQL data like big database for? Like, isn't that the main use case for in-memory SQLite databases hooked up to an ORM, which is something that is in their documentation front and center as an example? Like, you use it for unit tests.
And like but yeah. You have an issue with the sync API for that.
So yeah, but like that's how you generate a database. That's their main way of generating a database. So
when you create a new database, you use the sync API call.
Yeah, so the sync API, yeah, it's the entity framework equivalent of that is setting automatic migrations on. So like the first time you use a you hit a connection and it automatically tries to generate what the tables should look like, right? Okay. It's a pretty standard mode for ORMs, right? Yeah. It's got this 4C :true parameter, which says it could just be broken. It really, really could. That's fine. In that case, the answer is just that the documentation needs to get updated, and at some point this issue needs to be worked on. But,
well, this is one of the benefits of open source. If you ever find an issue with an open source library, you can create a fix and commit it back to this repo.
97 open PRs. See, I'm not exactly. I'm not. That's what I'm saying. Like, maybe. I mean, yeah, I'm very, very busy. I can't. Realistically, I can't. But even if I could, I wouldn't, because I'm looking at it. It's like there's no way this is worth my effort. This got 97 open PRs listening there, and no one is piping up and giving me direction saying yes, I know there's a lot of open PRs, but if you do a fix on this one, we'll definitely take a look at it. Like, no one, like, without communication like that, no, you've just killed the community. Like, it's effectively dead at that point, because what are you gonna? How's it gonna jumpstart? No one's gonna do any of this stuff. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what to tell you other than software's never finished; it's abandoned.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Also in JavaScript, JS modules continue to be a mess. I'll say that as well. It's freaking nightmare. Yeah. But like I thought the other day we tried this with this project where, like, you know what, we're on a recent version of Node. Recent version of Node supports modules. Cool. Enable that. Yeah, that doesn't work if your dependencies and dependencies of dependencies aren't also written in a style, or considering that there's multiple entry points into like a project, like through Mocha or through linting or stuff like that, and until all of those happen to work. it's just it was a huge headache of, and like it's all cryptic ass errors of trying to like track down where the issue is and trying to fix it. It's like, man, modules have been a thing since like two has been defined since 2015. Um, they were slow in coming to Node, but they're there now, and I'm a, I feel like the slowness of the ecosystem, how little few people are working on it, how few people that work on it actually know what they're doing is gonna be kind of what kills it. It's gonna be what makes it impossible to move forward. Yeah. 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 So those are kind of my two rants for today.
The ones for the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good. Any of you guys looking into Blazor, or have you looked into it? What do you think of it?
I I like booted it up briefly. It
Uh,
seems fine. I mean, like honestly, I'm not very interested in the server side Blazor thing, which until recently was the only part that was like production ready. I think client side Blazor is supposed to be production ready now, but I haven't heard of anyone actually really using it in production.
uh,
Um, that the client side Blazor is a lot more interesting than server side Blazor is just like, all right, it's a nicer veneer for web forms. Cool. I always kind of thought web forms went away too quickly, and
okay.
so yeah, but yeah, Blazor. I don't think it'll ever like cut a huge swath to the market share, but hopefully it's influential on other stuff and it shows the way for a lot of other stuff, and we can get off of JavaScript and onto something else.
Right.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious as if people are being cautious about jumping to something like Blazor because of what happened with Silverlight. You know,
Possibly, yeah. I mean, maybe, but like also, like, I think there's good reasons. Like, I think there's a lot of people that are into JavaScript and the JavaScript ecosystem now. Also, like, the .NET ecosystem is the .NET like development experience. It's good for like specific workflows. It's not good for an awful lot of workflows. It's actually really terrible for an awful lot of workflows. It's way too much effort to develop outside of Visual Studio.
Mm.
It's nearly impossible to develop outside of VS Code in Visual Studio because of the freaking debugger licensing. It's pretty difficult to do continuous testing without third-party components. It's pretty difficult to just have a freaking REPL open to try out stuff. You want the REPL to actually be able to load all the same stuff in the same app domain, so you could try all the stuff in context. You need to use something like LinkPad, which is only going to run on Windows. Like there's a lot of stuff in like I think .NET people like trick themselves about it being a fantastic development experience. It's a good development experience for certain workflows. The debugger, solid. Although the DevTools debugger is perfectly fine. Sometimes Webpack is bullshit, but the debugger. But the Webpack will and the like will continue to be bullshit with WebAssembly based stuff as well, right? Um, yeah, I people kid themselves about it a lot though.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of activity around Blazor, but I've only taken a look at a couple of articles here and there, and it's like, yeah, it's not compelling to me right now. At least the
Mhm.
what for showing is not pulling me in. I could see it like there are some like side projects that I would like to use whatever the easiest and quickest thing is that I can actually get stuff done, put it in production, and move on with life. And I still don't know what that thing is. At some point I thought, well, maybe Xamarin could be that. Maybe now Blazor could be that. But as I look into it and I try, experimenting with it, it's like, okay, it's still not the easiest thing I could use to get this one thing done.
Yeah. I think there's like, yeah, I mean, like, if they could pitch it, like, look, you could do stuff on the web, but you don't have to use JavaScript. You can use C# with its, standard library and use Link. Great, that does look nice. Although JavaScript has kind of sort of added a lot of those properties, but I mean, like, also, what are like pain points? A lot of the pain points are still there because, yeah, yes, the date class and the date handling in JavaScript is terrible. It's still not great in C#. Like, it's not. Um, yeah. Like, I don't think, I think C# could make inroads and show the way. I don't think it's ever going to grab a good chunk of that web space.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I have to say I do take these things with a grain of salt. I mean, I don't think it will be the new Silverlight for the
Well,
same reason, right? I mean, it may go away, but for a different reason. Like the reason why Silverlight went away like that is because it was built on like an ancient, standard that didn't go anywhere. I don't think Blazor has the same problem.
yeah, there's no plugins for it. Blazor's great in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
But depending on how they go about this, what audience they're targeting, then yeah, it could go away if they don't do it right. I'm like, I'll just wait. I'll wait and see.
I think it also depends on how many people are starting new projects too, because it's not like you're gonna start working on a project in React or Angular, and then suddenly go, hey, we ought to do this in Blazor, and then try and shift everything over. I don't see that happening, but um, yeah,
Right.
this is
But
kind of depends on when people have time for it.
yeah, how much does it really help though? I mean, you still have to know HTML and CSS and the best ways of using those, right? Okay, you don't have to use JavaScript and stuff like that. What about, like, there's still not a ton of off-the-shelf components that you can drag, like, you can drop in. Um, you can't use a bunch of, so whereas if you did a React front end, you could bring in a bunch of people like relatively green out of boot camps and stuff like that. You're going to have much tougher with that with .NET because there's fewer boot camps. Like, what is the actual business proposition for let's start using Blazor if
Well,
you're
if you have
not like we have an yeah, go ahead.
if you have a team of C#, a team of .NET developers, right, and you could cross train them to do heavy React and Angular if you need to, or you could switch to Blazor and pretty much not have to do as much training for that.
As much, yeah. So first of all, how many places have at this point in time have a bunch of .NET developers that don't also do web and other stuff, but also, like, yeah, you have to train them less, but yeah, no, they still have like the HTML and CSS and like proper accessibility, proper UI and stuff. Like, that's still a very, very big part of it that you have to like train people on. Um, and also, let's be honest about what train means in the context you said is like, maybe like a week's full worth of lectures, or you get them or you get them a course on Pluralsight or stuff like that, right? Whereas what training you actually need to do that stuff is like, you need like 6 months to a year of like rope where you're just doing that alone, right? And also everything you write's going to get thrown away because it's all a learning project.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you still have to hire. So realistically, if you're going to deliver stuff, you still have to hire people that know how to do those things. In the meantime, those people are like kind of sitting there and be like, well, X, Y, and Z are like totally a pain in the ass. It seems look like a pain in the ass in .NET. You could just write some JavaScript from that for that pretty easily. So like where I would see stuff like Blazor shining would be in more the in the way that it was initially supposed to work with JavaScript, where like you are a company that builds like a large complex component for the web, like like a big calendar that you want other people to embed in their applications, right? And not just via an iframe, right? Just actually embed directly. In that case, yeah, maybe your team builds it with Blazor on that and defines APIs properly, and then other people using JavaScript are pulling that in. That I can imagine being a good use case for it, but how many of those companies are there that are also on .NET? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be
Cool.
waiting. I don't have time to be experimenting with new things like that anymore.
That could also be the issue too. Maybe all of the .NET developers are just getting older and getting in the positions where they don't have as much free time as they used to have.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people that have experimented with it. It's fine. I just like really see very few business cases where you would use it. I mean, like knock out internal apps where things like UI and accessibility don't matter. Sure, go ahead and do that. You don't need like fancy client side Blazor for that. Use the server side stuff, which is like I said, basically fit better web forms. Silverlight would have worked perfectly fine for that as well, but you're not really taking over any sort of market with that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, .NET developers are tending to be the older folks. I mean, I don't see like the new kids. They're not going into .NET. I mean, that's not what's shiny for them.
Well, is it that? Like, I know lots of people that would love to go into .NET,
Yeah.
but yeah. I mean, .NET pays well, all sorts of stuff. How? So let's say you're green, you're fresh out of a boot camp. You just did like you just learned a bunch of web stuff, JavaScript. How the heck do you get into .NET? How do you? I mean, yeah, you could study on your own, but you got to get hired by someone, and who the heck who's doing .NET? Consulting companies mostly, and consulting companies have no business case for hiring juniors because their clients aren't coming them saying that we want junior developers. Like what? Again, how do you if you're a junior developer, it's really hard to get into .NET because for almost all .NET positions you have to show experience.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right. Yeah,
I,
I
I
don't
think
think
that's
it's a
true.
matter of like people not thinking it's cool.
I think that's true with any programming job. You need experience to get a job. Well, how do you get experience? You get a job. It's
Well, I mean, yeah, somewhat, but like, boot camps are training people in JavaScript, so that does get people a leg up, and there can oftentimes be an expectation there, JavaScript, TypeScript, and so on. Colleges are still largely doing Java, so there is a path in there. Um, yeah, and I mean, like as far as .NET, I mean, you can have the Java college grads kind of cross over to it, or who had been playing around with it. But again, the companies have to be open to hiring it.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I'll just point out there aren't all that many product companies that are .NET based. Like,
Yes.
and again, and so that leaves like consulting services, and it's much harder to place juniors there.
Oh well.
Yep.
All right. Well, I guess it's time to wrap up.
Oh yeah. I guess I can stop recording and ranting about stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for getting that going, George. I'll